Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. It's the single most important question for the future of vaping. Is vaping safe? Despite a mountain of research pointing to low health risks associated with vaping compared to smoking, a definitive answer remains elusive. But researchers behind a new multi-site international study of the health effects of vaping hope to remedy that, and they need your help. The Veritas Cohort Study is headed by Dr. Riccardo Polosa out of CoEHAR, the Center of Excellence for Harm Reduction at the University of Catania. And the lead scientist and global project manager for the Veritas Cohort Study is eminent Dr. Carl V. Phillips, joining us from a sunny and very warm state of New Hampshire. Dr. Phillips, thanks for coming back on RegWatch.
Hi, Brent. Good. Great to be here.
Dr. Phillips, explain why the Veritas study is by far the most substantial study on the health effects of vaping so far.
It's going to be a large study, hundreds of vapers. It's a cohort study, which means we follow people over time. At least 6 years is the plan here. It's taking place internationally. We're going to be collecting a lot of data, both clinical and survey data. And we are focusing on people who haven't smoked much. And these combine to make this by far the most useful and important study on the topic so far. We have studies out there that are based on data that happens to be collected in big data sets. It doesn't have enough detail. We have very short-term studies with a few vapers, but we have nothing like this in the world yet today.
So how hard is this to pull off then, if it is extraordinary?
It's not easy. It's been a lot of work getting to this point, and we, as you said, are at one of several launching points during the course of it. This particular launching point is figuring out where we have enough potential study subjects, and of course, we'll talk about more about where we're doing this and so forth later. The issue is, are there enough vapers who haven't smoked very much and, of course, are interested in being part of our study in a particular city or region?
Yeah, and I believe there's like 19 regions and cities that you guys are looking at. Is that correct?
Something like that. So we have several countries that we have pretty well covered entirely, and we have various other countries, 15 other countries where we have 1 or 2 study sites.
So I've got up some slides here. So this is from the website, and what is Veritas Cohort? And so I didn't do the acronym because I was already fumbling everything, but vaping affects real-world international surveillance. It's a bit ominous.
Yes, well, I mean, the real world surveillance is the key to this. We're not just taking a snapshot of how people responded to a survey. We're not putting people in an artificial setting, which, certainly has its value, handing a group of smokers some vapes and watching their clinical reactions and so forth. There's good information about that. Dr. Polosa has done a lot of that, but it's been his dream to expand it into a study like this, and we're fortunate enough to have the opportunity to pursue that.
So obviously, if this is new and big news with this study, why has it not been done so far? So like, what has been the problems or the challenges with previous studies, touching vaping effects and efficacy and safety?
Well, the biggest challenge for studying the effects of vaping is that most vapers are ex-smokers, and they've smoked quite a lot, and they've probably smoked, most of them have smoked fairly recently. Well, of course, we know that smoking is hazardous. We know that having smoked fairly recently or having smoked a lot over your lifetime is still hazardous. That is, you will have lasting health effects from that, which is, of course, the main reason why we want to promote vaping is to help people avoid those risks. But from a scientific perspective, the problem is that if somebody has smoked and we see that their health is less good than the average person, they have less lung capacity, they have problems in their lungs that show up on a scan, or any number of other issues, we wouldn't be able to tell if that were theoretically caused by vaping versus it having been caused by their lifetime of smoking. So basically, if you pick vapers at random, you have almost all ex-smokers. Yes, they're going to be less healthy than the average person who is of the same age. And so that becomes a huge challenge. And you have to start with people who have vaped, who do vape, but haven't smoked very much. And simply no one's done this yet. I mean, the reason no one's done it yet is no one's done it yet. But here we are. So,
I've been struggling with how to frame this. Is it an irony that in order to get the best information and research on vaping is to find those that have never smoked? Because, and the reason why I say irony is that if you talk to activists, they're adamant that just like the regulators are, just like the public health NGOs are, is that vaping should not be for an adult who's never smoked. You can be 25 years old, you can be 30 years old, and if you want to develop a fine little nicotine habit using vape,
yeah,
right? And so,
yeah, well, I mean, there are a couple of levels of response to that. I mean, the first one is, and I suspect your viewers all know this, but it's worth reiterating. There is absolutely not the slightest sliver of a doubt that vaping is less harmful than smoking, that switching to vaping is healthier than continuing to smoke, and so forth. There's no point in doing a study to try to show that. We already know that. So,
let me interrupt you for a second. You're an epidemiologist as well,
yeah,
right? So
that's right. Yeah.
So you know what you're talking about when it comes to research.
I've been working on this topic as long as anybody, arguably longer than anybody. So yes.
Okay, well, I'm going to bring you right back to that then in terms of efficacy and its safety and what we know. But let's just take a moment to fill our viewers in a bit more about what your background is, because it is extensive. And when I said eminent, I meant it.
Sure. I mean, I've been working on issues related to tobacco harm reduction, low-risk tobacco products, product substitution, since before e-cigarettes existed. I was one of the first, 2 or 3 people working on this topic starting back 20 years ago. I was at the time a professor of public health and medicine, and I continued working on this in that role for another 10 years before continuing to work on it, but shifting into other non-academic positions. I did a lot of the first studies of whatever in the topic area. I suspect I deserve credit for popularizing the term tobacco harm reduction, actually, though, it's sort of impossible to ever know that. But nobody was using that term when I and my research shop started using it, promoting it, emphasizing it, talking 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago now. So.
Well, that's a big deal. If you're able to come on our show and lay some claim to that moniker, that's excellent, Dr. Phillips. And okay, so we've got that out of the way. So let's get back then to something that you said to me in the pre-interview, and that was it's approximately 0.
Yeah.
Well, start us off on that. Give us a great soundbite.
Okay, sure. I mean, my view, and I will say without any attempted false modesty that I'm not sure why, that any view is more learned on this topic than my view. As you said, I'm an epidemiologist and I've been working on this from before its start, is that the best descriptor of the health risk from vaping or from smokeless tobacco use is approximately harmless. And you hear numbers like vaping's 95% less harmful than smoking. I mean, that's ridiculous. There is no conceivable way that vaping is 5% as bad for you as smoking. Could it be 1% as bad for you? Yeah, well, maybe. But even that is probably not the case. Could it be good for you on net because of the benefits of nicotine and there being trivial risk of disease caused by it? Yes, that's a possibility too. So approximately harmless is the right description of the risk from vaping. Once we have it narrowed down to approximately harmless, though, it sure would be nice to figure out if it's exactly harmless, if there's a little bit of risk that people ought to be worried about. And it is also useful to have the definitive cohort study that shows that it's absolutely harmless to those who doubt it or pretend to doubt it.
So if you're the guy that, has got the history here of naming things and creating great phrases and so forth, approximately harmless is something every viewer should be hearing right now. 95% less harmful. It almost sounds hard to say now. It's approximately harmless.
Yeah. And I've been pushing that phrasing a lot, and a lot of people have picked it up. And again, you can never tell with phrases, and I don't care. But I'm pretty sure that when people use that, it traces back to me pushing that message because it's the right one. The notion of exactly harmless, well, that's impossible to know. I mean, literally impossible. Science doesn't work that way. You can't show that something is exactly precisely zero. But what's relevant is that it is so close to zero that you might as well treat it as zero. As for whether there are doubters even still, and as for whether it's the tiniest, slightest risk, those are what we're trying to deal with this study.
So we've been asking for 5 years on RegWatch. We're talking with scientists that, are the ones that can weigh in on this issue. And that is vaping safe? And for the first 4 years, we always get, nothing is ever safe. They would, rely on the 95% less harmful and so forth. But, vaping had taken such a hit over the epidemic issue. And then when E-Valley hit last fall, we kind of had it with that. Like our on-site scientists we're talking to, we're asking them, is vaping safe? And we get that humming and hawing. That's not enough for vaping right now. If the lead scientists in the vaping world can't say it's safe, then we got a problem and there needs to be a solution there. And it sounds like approximately harmless is a part of that solution.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think that's why when I point out that phrase to people and explain the basis for it, it catches on because exactly as you say, it's accurate. It's exactly what we need. It's simple and straightforward. It doesn't get into the, theories of science, philosophy of science that says you can never prove anything and that, you can never prove a negative, especially, can you prove that vaping never causes any cases of disease? Well, even if it doesn't, no, you can't prove that. But we make practical decisions. This is a practical decision. This isn't theoretical physics where we're trying to figure out whether a particle exists or not. This is a matter of individual choice, just like, whether you decide to have a scone for breakfast once a week. Is that harmless completely? It's approximately harmless. Go ahead, have it, right?
It all depends on what the nutritionists are saying or public health on any one day.
Into nutrition. That's a whole other mess.
It is a mess, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so like when we were talking with Dr. Leon Shahab out of what university is he out of again? Do you recall? University of London, maybe? I think
London, yeah.
Yeah. And his research is biomarkers. And so what's really interesting about biomarkers is it's bringing the science closer to the approximately harmless. So, if we're not going to use the 95%, safer or less harmful, and with the, obviously there's a bunch of research out there that still comes out that, talks about how vaping is bad for you and hurts you and so forth. And no matter what we say, politicians and body part orgs are going to still be hammering home on 5-year-old scare stories. So the thing is that with biomarkers, we know so much about how smoking affects the body physically, the chemistry, the biology, and so forth, that you can, reduce some of those effects to biomarkers and then look to see if those same kind of markers exist in vapors. And obviously, his research is showing that it's not the case. And he was able to say, when asked that question about whether or not a vaping is safe, he said, it's been shown safe. Mm-hmm. And that's also another one that I think it's important to bring out and to keep pushing out to our viewers.
Yeah, well, of course, safe isn't a scientific term, really. I mean, safe is is an everyday vague term about, what seems okay to do versus what doesn't seem okay to do. And if you think of it that way, yeah, that works too. You can say vaping is safe. If somebody wants to interpret it as meaning scientifically shown to never cause any harm whatsoever, then no, that doesn't work. You're never going to get that.
True. So let's talk then about this specific study. If the idea going into it is that vaping, is approximately harmless, how does the study get put together then? Are you going to try to prove that? Which I know you can't really prove that, I guess, but how do you formulate this study to then come out on the other side and it to be credible, and how do you work the results?
Well, as with any study, you design it so that it can answer the question being, can we find any evidence of a health risk from vaping in the absence of having a lifetime of heavy smoking behind you? And we look at lung function. That's what we're focused on, because the hypothesis is that if there is going to be a problem that is detectable, look for it in the lungs first, because of course there's still lung involvement and so forth. We have a ton of evidence already about smokeless tobacco use, and that doesn't need to be repeated. And systemic nicotine is thus studied as a result of that, as well as other exposures. But what's missing from that in terms of understanding vaping is the lung involvement, and so that's what we're focused on. And in terms of how you answer questions, how you're credible and honest, well, you gather the data and you report what it says. And whatever the data says, whatever the truth is, we, society, collectively, scientists, and most importantly, vapers, want to know it, right? Who more than people who vape would benefit from learning that there is, in fact, a bit of a risk? It wouldn't mean that they had to make their decision based on that and say, oh, there's a bit of a risk, I'm not going to do it. It would still be an option to do, or should be in a free society, but it lets people make an informed choice, and making an informed choice is what harm reduction is all about.
So let's talk about harm reduction for a minute. Is it harm reduction for people who've never smoked? Like, what about those people that have never smoked, and they're 20 years old or 21? Does harm reduction apply to them when it comes to vaping? Well,
first I have to take a step back. Harm reduction, of course, doesn't just mean product substitution. It's a philosophy of freedom and empowerment and individual autonomy and so forth, that people shouldn't be punished for a choice that they make about their own body, whether it's criminalization of illicit drugs or punitive taxation of tobacco products or vaping products. So that's part of it. And of course, part of it is informing people about low-risk alternatives and, if at all possible, making low-risk alternatives available. So your question is, well, what's the point in having a low-risk alternative if it's not an alternative to something for someone, right? So it's only an alternative if they're already a smoker. Well, first off, that's not entirely true, because one of the ways that vaping eliminates smoking is having a smoker switch to vaping. But another way that vaping eliminates smoking is having someone who would have started smoking, a young person who would have, in a world without vaping, smoked, but instead they vape. And by pretty much any measure, that's better still. To have not smoked in the first place and to have just vaped is better. You know, you see the jokes that sometimes people make when that messaging is out there, when the messaging is, oh, vaping's only for people who smoke. And it's like, okay, does that mean we should have people start smoking for a while, because only then will they be allowed to start vaping? No, it's better that they just vape from the start. So young people who start with vaping, that's also harm reduction. But also people who might have decided against smoking because they knew it was hazardous, but want to do something like that and take advantage of the opportunity to vape, that's also part of harm reduction, in the sense of allowing people to make a choice for themselves. And so those of us who are concerned with people's welfare don't think that vaping is just for smokers. It is for anybody who is made better off by vaping.
Which is the whole idea, I think, isn't it? Let's jump over to the website. I've got it right here. Are you a potential study subject? And so let me just read off a little bit here. We're currently collecting contact information to determine if we can begin research at our various study sites. If you might be interested in participating, please fill out the form at the bottom of the page. And of course, a little bit of information here. You have to be a current daily vapor and have very little history of smoking. So less than 1,000 total cigarettes. So 50 packs of cigarettes in your life. I blew past that, like, I don't know, at 12 or something. Maybe I was a little older, but currently and so you have to be a non-smoker and have not smoked every day for at least 2 years. So pretty serious in terms of making sure that people are not, don't have that history. Obviously, that's to keep, I guess, the results clean, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because, I mean, you simply cannot figure out whether vaping is ever so slightly hazardous or not hazardous at all if you have the confounding, that's our technical term for it in epidemiology, the confounding by past smoking. It's simply impossible. You have to just take that out of the mix in order to be able to detect any risk. Because, I mean, the numbers that we're talking about, remember, are approximately harmless. If there is any risk from vaping, it's going to be, 1/10, 1/20th, 1/50th of the risk from former smoking. And I'm not talking about current smoking. I'm talking about the added risk that comes from having smoked a lot in your past is many, many times higher than the largest reasonable estimate for any risk from vaping. And it's simply impossible to deal with the data when you have that complication.
So you mentioned confounding and, excuse me, I got something in my eye there. I'm tearing up as I'm about to bring up Professor Glantz, because he doesn't follow these kinds of rules, does he? He tends to, like, if he wants to study vaping, he'll just study smokers and say they're having heart attacks. And then, I can't possibly describe how horrible his research is. And yeah. I mean, so give us an understanding of how he approaches research, because he's got the largest voice in tobacco control. He's the biggest enemy of vaping. and
Yeah.
and truth does not seem to matter for him.
Oh, yeah, it's worse than that. I mean, there are a lot of people who just do shoddy work that's skewed in the direction of showing problems and so forth. I mean, it's pretty easy to show that that individual in particular is a very clever con man. I mean, he carefully designs studies to get particular wrong answers. I mean, this isn't sloppy work. This isn't accidental. This isn't failing to control for confounding adequately just because somebody isn't good at what they do. He's very good at what he does. And what he does is construct disinformation. He's a skilled propagandist. If you look at his studies with the eye of an expert in research methods, you see not stupid sloppiness like you see coming from 95% of tobacco controllers. You see very clever deception built into the methodology. The fingerprints are all over it.
That's troubling, isn't it? We had Derek Yak, who's the president and founder of the Foundation for Smoke-Free World, on the show a couple of weeks ago, and when we brought up the topic of Professor Glantz, he told a neat little story, about back in the day at the very start of everything. So I guess this would have been probably in the early 90s or late 80s or something. And they're having a chat. And I guess the conversation got around to, if you had a choice to work on tobacco control, if you had a choice to pick an epidemiologist or a political scientist, which would you pick? And Dr. Yak said, well, I'll pick an epidemiologist. And what did Dr. Glantz pick? A political scientist. And I mean, that's pure communist. That's a,
yeah, I would argue it's kind of orthogonal to whether someone's communist or not, but it's definitely unfortunate. But the key with him is he knows what he's doing, and he's intentionally doing it wrong. And as I said, if you look at it with a fair bit of expertise in the methods, you can see that it's cleverly designed in particular ways, whereas most of the stuff is just stupid sloppy. I mean, it was perhaps sloppy intentionally in the direction that's going to produce anti-tobacco, anti-vaping messages, but it's just weak. He is masterful at what's clearly intentional deception.
That's a pretty big deal.
It is, yeah. I mean, and he's reasonably close to unique in that. There are a few other people who try to imitate it, and they can't pull it off. I mean, I don't know whether it's a compliment or an insult to say someone is a successful supervillain, right? But that's what it is. It's the difference between in a superhero movie between the random street thugs who the superhero can take out and the supervillain who is a worthy opponent.
Now that's something coming from a man sporting his Dr. Evil look.
Yeah. My promo picture still had hair. I noticed the one.
You're looking good, man. You're looking good. So, all right. So let's dive into subjects. And so we've got some questions online asking, how do we get involved if we want to get involved? Of course. Now, I mean, for everybody, when you're seeing the name key there with Dr. Phillips, at the very bottom is the URL for the website. And I mean, I can spell it out here. It's Veritas Cohort, that's COHORT at CoEHAR, CoEHAR.org. And we'll throw that up right here so you can see it.
When you type in the URL, you can leave out the cohort part. If you just do veritascohort.org, it'll redirect you to that. So.
Very excellent. So that's just the straight up there, and that'll take you to it. So for all the viewers, that's where you head to. And, oh, no, you don't. You do?
I think you have to go to if you just go to veritascohort.org, it redirects you to the home page, and then you can go to the
Oh, I might be typing it wrong.
to the sub page there.
Oh, yeah, it needs an A. All right. There we go. Yeah, so that's it.
Yeah.
So you can just type in veritascohort.org.
And then there's the study subject tab you can see over there on the left. And that's currently being used for what you said, for us to collect contact information to see if we can find enough study subjects. And if you scroll down, you can show the list of places where we are recruiting. So here in North America, we have a site in Toronto. Sorry, we don't have anything in Vancouver, but we have Toronto, and we have several sites in the United States, as well as Mexico City and Costa Rica. In Europe, we have multiple sites in Italy covering most of the country, multiple sites in England covering most of the country, Poland also, and individual sites in Germany, Estonia, Greece, Hungary, Ireland. There's one in Scotland in addition to the ones in England. And let's see, where else? Lisbon and Madrid, and Auckland, New Zealand, also on the other side of the world.
Right. So just to make sure that we kind of put the point to it here. So if you are a daily vapor and have never smoked, you're wanted. And then hopefully you live close to one of these locations. And if that's the case, then make sure you register. You're not enrolling people yet. You're trying to find out if there's enough subjects for each one of these areas before you take it to the next step, which is clinical and enrolling officially and so forth, correct?
That's right. And it doesn't have to be never smoked. I mean, it would be perfect if we could find hundreds of vapors who have literally never taken a puff on a cigarette, but we don't expect that that's possible. So it's just not smoked too much, okay? And so, and we'll have to adjust sort of where the cutoff for that is based on who we have signed up. So if 50 packs in your lifetime is kind of the number, kind of put that in your head. If you think you're kind of close to that, sign up here for, identify yourself as a potential subject. That kind of thing, right? Yeah, exactly. And so we need to figure out if which study sites are viable. And we're pretty confident we're going to find enough in London. We don't know whether we're going to find enough in various other places. So it's really important for people to register here, because if at a potential study site we only get 2-3 people registering there, we're probably just going to have to drop that site, and we sure don't want to do that.
Right. And be thinking of your friends too. Maybe if it's not you, but your buddy, fits into this, you should make sure that they know about it, right? So they can register.
Yeah. And and we're gonna and we have ambassadors. That's what we're calling our local study site representatives in place in each of these locations. And there's another tab that'll take you over to a list of them. They are already at work recruiting locally in each of their areas through social media and vape shops and so forth. Just this week, we started putting out national and international calls, trying to find, anybody who's in one of these sites. And of course, we realize most people in the world don't live in one of these places, but we have pretty good coverage. A lot of people do. So, we have this program, and we have social media, and we have other outreach to try to get the word out to everyone. And as you say, tell all your friends, forward it, post it yourself, and so on, because it's really important that we get this going. It's potentially hugely important for the future of vaping, because as you've said several times, Brent, there are people out there who are making negative claims about the health effects of vaping. And we have biomarkers and we have small studies, but if we could come back with this and say, look, we've followed these people for year after year after year and did not find any measurable health effects, that's going to be really much more useful for helping protect vaping in the future. And of course, if we come back and find that there's a hazard, vapers are going to want to know that, and we'd like to be able to tell them so that they can make an informed choice.
Sure. And what kind of commitment do they have to make? You've said 6 years, so they have to come in once a week, once a month, once a year.
Yeah.
Are you going to poke? Are you going to poke them and prod them?
Once a year for a clinical visit, and several surveys a year. So, so if somebody isn't, exactly in the city where one of these sites is, but is willing to make the trip in once a year, they are encouraged to sign up.
Will they have to do running machines, with the breath thing and all of the heart EKG stuff?
That type of thing, and scans. We won't be poking so much. We'll be scanning and breathing and so forth. Should be painless as for pretty much everybody. If it's not painless, then somebody might have a problem.
Totally.
Yeah.
So okay, well, so obviously it's if you're a vapor and you believe in this. This is your opportunity to not just, help by sharing articles and, be it by vote, hashtags or whatever. You could be a part of this 6-year study that could provide a definitive answer, at least definitive enough, hopefully, to silence some of the voices of critics.
That's the hope. And, as you said, you have to be open as a scientist to whatever the data shows. But we go into this with the hypothesis that whatever hazard might be associated with vaping, we're back to approximately harmless. It's probably going to be too small to show up, and we'll be able to report back and say, hey, we tried to find any risk from vaping following hundreds of vapers for years, and nope, it didn't show up. Or, as I said, we come back and say, ooh, this doesn't look good. We should probably get the word out to vapers that we think it might be causing a bit of a problem in this particular way. Either way, it's exactly the information that vapers should want to have coming out into the world, and
Sure.
We can't do it without them.
What about use of, non-combustible nicotine products? So your snus or chewing tobacco or even like a nicotine gum or patch. Is any of that knock you out of the study, or is that okay?
Yeah, it doesn't knock you out of the study. Ideally, we will have study subjects who aren't using these other products. But if you are someone who uses those other products and meet the other criteria, please go sign up. The intake questionnaire, whatever you want to call it, the contact form actually asks about that. Again, in a perfect world, if we have dozens and dozens of people in your city who would like to be part of the study, we might say, thank you, but because you use snus also, we're going to leave you out of this because it's a complication. On the other hand, if we don't have enough study subjects in that particular site, if we don't include the people who use snus, then great, welcome aboard. We need you.
What about if I only vape zero nic?
That's actually fine. We will be asking questions once the study is underway about what people vape and how they vape and how much they vape and so forth. But there are no restrictions on how much nicotine you use, including zero, for becoming part of the study.
And potential subject thinking this through, what if I want to quit vaping at some point during that 6 years? I mean,
if you have a specific plan to quit vaping, in the next year, and we do ask this also, if you have a specific plan to quit vaping or to start smoking or any other major change in your tobacco and nicotine use within the next year, then then no, we would rather not enroll you. That's too much of a complication. But we recognize, of course, that many of the people who enter this study and are vapers and don't have a specific plan to stop vaping will still stop vaping in a year or two or three. And of course, we've accounted for that, and we aren't encouraging any particular behavior, right? I mean, you have to meet certain qualifications to enter the study. You need to be a vapor now. That's what you are. You need to not be a smoker now. If the study subject, if you choose to make a change, we're not asking you not to, right? This is what's called an observational study, right? We're going to follow people, real world, it's right there in the name, following their natural lives and their natural behavior, and collect data without ever telling people what they should be doing. We'll just collect information on what they are doing.
And that brings me to an important question, because normally or often in research like this, to try to get the right accurate results that gives you reliable results, you have to make sure that everyone's using the same device or the same e-juice or the same nicotine level, so forth. So everybody's using the same thing, so you can compare that. So are these subjects going to be limited in any way? Are they going to be asked to use specific products or devices and so forth in order to get that unanimity for results?
No restrictions on what somebody vapes. They just need to be a vapor. No suggestions, requests, anything about how they do it. We'll ask, we will gather that information. But again, this is all about it being real world. So the methodologies that you just described, where you do a clinical trial, an artificial experiment on people, and every one of them gets the same device, the same e-liquid and so forth, that's not real world. And you could argue that it's more useful for answering some questions, although even that's a little shaky. Letting people behave with the natural distribution of different behaviors, different devices, different quantities, different nicotine strengths, and so forth, that's what the real world looks like. If there's a risk, we don't want to miss it because we're only looking at one particular type of device, and the risk only comes from a different type of device. And so in this way, real world distributions of naturally chosen behaviors are what's interesting.
So vapors in the wild is what we're talking about.
Vapors in the wild, yes.
That's excellent. So before we do some of our last questions, I want to just pop over to our microsite for our funding at RegWatch. And of course, we spend a lot of time. This is our 5th year anniversary coming up, covering the vaping file, which will be this September, actually. So we're almost there. God, I feel old. Oh, my back is hurting and everything. But of course, we promote fact-based science, and I hate having to say fact-based because science should just be fact-based. That's de facto, but it's clearly not the case. We counter misperceptions, we destigmatize nicotine, and of course, we hold researchers, regulators, reporters to account. We need your help. We're going to be we are now starting to enter into a fundraising phase. I mean, COVID just killed us as well as everybody else. If you got a few bucks, please join our fine group of companies that have been keeping us alive. Some of these guys, Demand Vape is crazy awesome. And of course, you guys all know the names of the people that have been working hard for us. Some of these people here, though, that are on this site have taken a pause, and I've left them up because they are all fine people. But we do need your help. Please go to support.regulatorwatch.com and consider making a contribution. And I hate doing that, Carl. I hate asking for money from people. But, that's the way it is. So, gotta do it. So, is a 6-year study long enough? Because when we're talking about smoking and the effects of smoking on people, I mean, that's one of the things about smoking. Oh, I'll smoke right now. It's not going to hurt me until, 30, 40 years from now. And that's true. The effects are far out there. And so why should we expect, because critics of vaping will say that that model should be applied to vaping. And 6 years, I mean, that's nothing in the grand scheme of how tobacco kills people.
Yeah. Well, two answers to that. The first one goes to your gotta ask for money thing. If if this is working and it's 6 years in and we're following a cohort of hundreds of people and they're willing to keep at it, I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to find funding, or my successor. I'm old too. My successor will be able to find funding to keep it going. You can't get 6 years in 2026 unless you start in 2020. You can't get 10 years in 2030 unless you start in 2020, right? You got to start somewhere. So that's part of the answer is, yeah, keeping going would be great. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The second part of the answer is, if knowing what we do about the harms from smoking now, unlike 100 years ago when they were first starting to show up, right? And having current technology, we could figure out that smoking was bad for you in a few years, because the lung problems start to show up, and we're doing high resolution scans and we're doing other tests that would, not definitively, I mean, that's science, right? There could be something magical about vaping that 32 and a half years after you start vaping, your arms fall off, right? And we won't know that for quite some time. But realistically speaking, in terms of plausible outcomes with lung damage, we should be able to detect those prospectively after only a few years. And of course, many of the people entering the study, none of them will have started yesterday, right? So we're going to start studying people who have been vaping 2, 3, 5 years. And so it's not quite as narrow a window of vaping history as it looks like if you don't think of it that way. And if we don't see anything, it doesn't prove that nothing bad's ever going to happen, but it certainly makes us more confident of it.
So one of the questions that I've got, and it's hard to be in control of the results and how the media is going to cover it, but in the end, if no mainstream media covers the results of this study, then it's a tree falling in the forest. So thinking about that, are you already planning and strategizing? I mean, the biggest impediment is getting this message out into mainstream once the results are in.
Yeah, I mean, and we will certainly make every effort to get that out. And of course, the results won't just wait 6 years and come in then. We will be collecting results and producing reports as soon as we have something to report on. So there will be multiple reports over the years. And yes, of course, we'll make every effort to make sure that the media, the regulators, everybody who ought to be seeing this and paying attention to it do so.
Excellent, excellent. So are there any other considerations that vapers who may fit in this, fine criteria that they should be considering before they go sign up?
Well, again, it's not a sign up. It's not, in the sense, it's not a commitment of any sort. They're not providing study data. They're just providing contact information and screening information. So I mean, there's no risk, no commitment. I strongly encourage anybody who's thinking about it to go do it. The questions that we want answers to about smoking history, about vaping and so forth, they're there on the page. Very simple to answer. Should take about 3 minutes to do it, and it's all covered there. And I mean, the more people we get filling out this form, the better a chance we'll have of being able to launch a particular study site. And if we collect information on people somewhere and we don't have quite enough, and somebody isn't quite the right fit, but they're a pretty good fit, that's what we want. If we have extras, we will say, thank you, we're deleting your information, watch for our reports. there's no downside to going ahead and checking out the sign up, in other words.
Absolutely.
And don't self-censor about it. If you're hearing this and you think, I think I fit that, but I'm not entirely sure, go take the 3 minutes, fill out the form. We ask the questions we need the answers to. We'll take care of the rest. Please.
That's excellent news. And I just, as we're wrapping up here, I'd like to just make sure that if you missed it in that lead at the start here, that, your partner in this is Dr. Polosa, Riccardo Polosa. And, he's very famous when it comes to this kind of research. So, I mean, it's a great team.
Yeah, it really is. And he did the study, the tiny small versions of this study that we have are his great work. Following a small number of vapers who haven't smoked for a shorter time and gathering data like this. And so, miniature versions of this have been done and laid the groundwork for him to envision this bigger study that he then brought me in on and that we're doing. So that, this isn't out of the blue. This isn't never been tried. It's just hasn't been done on this scale before. But thanks to his work, we've done it before. We're just expanding it.
Well, and that's great news, actually, because that research was fantastic research. It was solid, rock solid research. So, well, Dr. Phillips, I really want to thank you for coming on. What we're going to do is we're going to wrap this show right now. And for our viewers out there that want to listen a little bit about COVID, I mean, just the tease here is that you're the first epidemiologist that we've had on the show that's actually had COVID.
Yeah, I don't know how many epidemiologists have had COVID. I haven't talked to any others. So yeah.
So that makes it unusual. And then you're the first person that we've had on the show that's had COVID at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this show, and I'm going to stop the stream on Facebook and YouTube, and I'm just going to crank on another stream. It'll be the same thumbnail. We'll just jump back on and we'll have a quick chat about that. And then I'll clean everything up and all the stuff will get released to again later tonight and into tomorrow. So Dr. Phillips, thanks again. Just repeat the URL for us so everyone knows what that is.
Yes, it's Veritas Cohort. So Veritas, VERITAS Cohort, COHORT.org. And once you're at that main page, go to the tab that says Study Subject. It'll have a list of the places where we are looking for contact information for potential study subject. If you're there, please fill out the form. Again, for vapers who haven't smoked a whole lot, and we ask a few other questions too, but those are really the keys there. And if that describes you or describes someone you know, or you have a great social network where you can send out this information, please do it, because the study can only happen if we get enough people signing up at this stage.
Well, that's excellent. Well, thanks again, Dr. Phillips. Just stay right there. And that is it for this edition of RegWatch. Before you head off, please go over to support.regulatorwatch.com. That's support.regulatorwatch.com, and consider making a financial contribution to our vaping coverage. It's easy. Dig into your wallet, or we'll come find you and do it, and toss us a few dollars. You'll be happy you did, and so will we. And while online, don't forget to like us on Facebook, and please follow us on Twitter. For regulatorwatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.